My name's Jason. I'm head of technology for ForSet. And just to give you a little bit of background of why I'm here and why you should listen to me. I've been working with visual storytelling, I guess, for about 5.5 years now. ForSet itself is actually a brand new organization since May, I think, when we started, so 6 months. But before that, the majority of ForSet, worked at Jumpstart, Georgia. And so 10 of us left Jumpstart and formed ForSet. So as a team of ForSet, we've been actually working in this area, the majority of us for over 3 years, some of us for 5 years. So as a team, ForSet has been working on visual communications, whether that means like infographics, facts, animations, GIFs, interactives, data portals. Hello. Come on in. So you name it, we've probably tried to do it if it involves data and design. So in general, we try to use technology, data, and design to tell some kind of an effective and engaging story. Whether that means, finding open government data that's buried in some report and just saying, hey, look, did you know this? Or working with local NGOs to help them better tell their communications. So today, we're going to go through many examples, most of which is stuff that we've done, some good, some bad, but some of it is other people, so I'll try not to be too mean when it's other people. But we're just going to go through examples and just trying to get you an idea of, if you're doing a visual story, things you should think of while you're doing it. And actually, before I get started, can you hear me? I know my voice is quiet and low, so especially you guys in the back, if you can't, just tell me, and I'll try and speak up, okay? So first, let's define visual storytelling, okay? Visual storytelling, in essence, just makes the complex easier to understand and does it so that it has a more of an impact, okay? And as an example to show you, okay? Last month here in Georgia, okay, this is in Georgian, don't worry about reading it, but when you look at it, you can see there's lots of numbers, right? Lots and lots of numbers. So last month in Georgia, we had an election. And as part of the election process, the political parties have to report their party finances, how much they've received, how much they've spent. And so this online organization wrote an article about it. And this is just a snippet. It went on and on and on. But it's just all of this data about party finances. And even if I could read Georgian, I wouldn't read this. It's just too much. It's too complicated. And for my friends that do read Georgian, they said even though they worked with us and we worked with party finances, they couldn't follow the story themselves. So on this side, wow, I'm sorry, it's very dark, so I'll try to explain it. So we did the same party finance story. This is just about advertising expenses by party. So we're just showing that the Georgian Dream, the ruling party, they spent 800,000 lari in 3 weeks. So in just 3 weeks, they spent 800,000 lari on advertising. And then the next party, this Alliance of Patriots, was 131,000. So it's almost 8 times more spending on advertising. And this one, we feel, it's just much easier to see visually. You see the parties, you see the numbers. You don't have to read all this in between text. And it's just easier to convey a story. Like this, we would actually call a fact. It's just a couple data points. There's no actually narrative story with it. You can look at the data and you understand what's going on. It's easy to do. And to us, it's much easier to follow than this. Now this together would probably work very well if they're telling the same story. Like this could be supplemental to telling a full story. That would be great. But this by itself also works. But this by itself, it works, but it's not pleasant. Like if you think in terms of people sharing this story, how many people are going to share this versus sharing this? Okay, this is what's going to get people's attention on Facebook. This is not. So just something to keep in mind. So I'll just say right now, some of this stuff that was said yesterday during the talks, you're going to see some of it here again. I didn't steal from them. I actually created this many weeks ago, so I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself. So visuals are very popular, mainly because our brains can process a visual item 60,000 times faster than text. And if you think about it, like when you're going through your social media feed, you're just scrolling, and you can quickly, when you see an image or a GIF or something, your mind just quickly knows, okay, do I want this or no? But if you see something that's just text, you have to stop and decide if you want to read it, and then decide if you want to go on. So visuals are just much faster to process. Then on top of that, by having adding a compelling visual to your story actually makes it so people can recall the purpose or the idea of your story 55% more. So it's actually, if it's just text, they can only recall it up to 10%. But if you have text and a visual, they can recall it up to 65%. And then lastly, as many of you know, with social media, anything with a photo or some kind of visual context is going to be more likely to be shared. So unfortunately, in this day and age, you need visuals. And so effective visuals can greatly enhance your impact. Whether it's just adding it to a previous story or doing a whole infographic just by itself or an animation, it can really add to it. And so we're going to go through some examples now and talk about why. Again, this was brought up yesterday. So KISS, okay, stands for Keep It Simple, Stupid. And this actually came from the US Navy in the 60s. And their idea was, if it's complicated, then it's not going to work. It's going to be too hard for anybody to learn it and use it to maintain it. So just keep it simple. Make it easy for people to learn. So as an example, okay, there's a lot going on in this visual. Okay, you have the numbers down the sides. You have all these illustrations in here, kids riding their bikes, ducks. There's so much going on. Like for me, when I look at this, I actually look here, and I actually don't even see the numbers. And this is actually the main point. And what they're trying to do, like this is talking about quality of highways, so that's why there's a road. Here it's talking about enough traffic signs, so here's a traffic sign. But all this other stuff gets in the way. I mean, yes, you could do it, but again, keep it simple. Just stick to the message. Don't add so much in there that your readers get so overwhelmed. Yes, I like your reaction. Yes. Yeah, so here it's actually better laid out. You have nice blocks, so you can kind of see where things are. Pardon? A bit, in a different way, but it's also bad. Okay, so this one at least you can kind of see the different items, but why are all these people here? Like say, this is 17,000 people. Does this represent 17,000 people? And this 30%, does these 4 people somehow represent 30%? To me, I say no, they're just trying to fill in the space. Basically, they saw the opportunity, and so they just copy-pasted people everywhere and put it in there. So again, just keep it simple. Like, maybe you could have had like a couple people like on the side or in the background or something, but you don't need to fill up the whole space, okay? So KISS, the number one thing is you can see, show restraint. Yes, you can go crazy, but does it actually help your story? Or does it actually distract people, as in the previous 2 examples? Like, just kind of taking a step back, if this was your story, would you actually read the whole thing? Or is it just too overwhelming for you? So as in the first example, like empty space is a good thing. Like when there's so much stuff going on, your eyes don't actually know where to go, what to focus on. But when you actually have empty space, your eyes kind of can see where they need to go, where the story is, or just how to follow the flow. So the next ones then is avoid lots of text, numbers, visuals. Again, just keep it simple. Just restrain yourself. Don't go overwhelming. And so now I want to go through some more examples and show you some more bad ones, but also show you some good ones. So this is a story we did at our previous job, and I'll say this is my story, so this is my fault. The idea of the story, we found some data source somewhere that basically showed Georgia is the software pirate, like the #1 software piracy nation. And to me, I was like, yeah, #1, let's go. And even the governments, like a few years ago when we were doing this, it was common in governments just to have pirated software. I'm hoping it's better now. But so the idea here was just to show that Georgia was #1. But do we really need all these other countries? I mean, there's like 40, 50 something countries here. This is too much. Like we should have shown restraint and kept it down to like 5 to 10. Like maybe the neighboring countries, maybe like the US or Russia, just like bigger partners that are related to Georgia. But do we really need, I can't read this, India, Romania, Egypt? You know, when you're comparing it to Georgia, just put it to something that they care about. So like this could have been much better if there's maybe just the one line. And maybe like, okay, first place, last place is actually USA. So you just like first and last to get through the extremes and then just kind of the related people in between. But this is too much.
So was it published in local media?
Probably not. We created it ourselves.
Global or local? Then it changed your vision for these countries. Because if you focus on the South Caucasus, you can choose Armenia, Azerbaijan.
Sure.
So that's
Yeah. So our focus was local Georgian. So we do things in English and Georgian, but primarily all the work we've been doing has always been for the Georgian market. Yeah, it's too much. Yeah. Okay. Another example. This is a visual about the process of getting a visa-free travel to Europe. And basically, there are 7 steps that the country has to go through before the EU will hopefully approve it. And so going back to the list we just had, this is way too much text, okay? If you look at this, there's no special visuals or anything to help tell this. So this could have just easily been in a 7-item bullet point list. So although it's organized nicely, it flows, but really having it as an infographic doesn't help in any way.
It looks like gravestone. I don't know, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Like first impression, like
Sure. Yeah.
Then I read it. First the visual thing, then I read it. Okay, it's visual free.
Yes. So in this case, and in this case, some of this text is not easy to turn into a visual. You can't always take some text and say, okay, we can use this to represent it. That's not always possible. And so in this case, we chose just to show text. And to be fair, like the rest of it, there's actually numbers and charts and stuff. But this, if possible, it would have been nice to actually try and have some kind of visual next to it, just so instead of having to read this whole thing, there could have been a visual just indicating what this text was about. So really, to me, like if this is the whole thing, it could have just been like a normal blog post or something. It didn't need to be this visual. Okay, so here's a good one. So this is a story about a day in the life of bus drivers here in Georgia. And in this one, you can see lots of empty space. So in this one, lots of empty space. Your eyes know where to go to follow the story. And there's quite a few visual elements, but it's not overwhelming because we have this empty space just to kind of let your eyes not be overwhelmed. And with the arrows, just the slight arrows, it just kind of helps tell you where to go to read the story. Okay? And so just to compare, this one, that kind of has a similar feel. You have this road, but there's so much going on. Whereas this one, there's a lot going on here too, but because you have this empty space, it's so much easier to follow. So again, like this one, say all of this stuff in the middle, all of this excess stuff, if that was gone, this would probably be much better. Okay, next item, tell a story. And this was touched upon quite a bit yesterday. There's a difference between just having a data point, a fact, or actually having a data point and a fact as part of a story that tells them something or gets them to understand what's going on, to get them engaged. So again, this one. What the heck is the story here? Like these are just a bunch of facts. But like for instance, okay, they developed so many co-ops. So 52 districts, 17,000 people, I guess. Is this good? Like this 30%, I'm guessing that's a 30% increase. Is that good? Is that what they wanted? Is that actually lower than they wanted? So there's like no context to this. It's just a bunch of random numbers. And for some things, that's fine. If like say above, you explain it. You give them like an intro into what this is. But in this case, it's just a bunch of numbers. Like, okay, we trained 240 co-ops and whatever this 35 number is. Okay, but why should I care? Like, is this a good thing, a bad thing? What was it last year? So there's no context to this. It's just a bunch of random numbers. So again, a list of facts, as in the last one, it's not a story. It's just numbers. You need to put some kind of context to it. And the main thing that we try and always ask ourselves is, why is this important? So when you're writing a story, whether it's text or visual, just take a step back and be like, am I answering the question, like, why should I care? Why is this important? Why should I spend my valuable time reading through this item? The next one is, if you're telling them something and potentially they have the potential to somehow get involved or get engaged, tell them that. Tell them what they can do. Don't assume that they'll then go do a Google search and find out for themselves. If you already got their attention, take that extra step and tell them what they can do. And then lastly, I kind of already said this, why should I care? That's kind of what you're all mentally doing, like when you're going through your social media feed. If you're deciding on whether or not you want to click on something, it's like, do I care, do I care, do I care? Oh, I care, let's go see. So it's like, you have to try and answer the question, why should I care? Again, if you were at the talks yesterday, you saw this one. Okay, so this one's about air pollution. And the whole top half is just facts, it's just data. It's saying for these 5 cities, for these different air pollutions, you can say, okay, this one is pretty much always bad, almost always bad. Okay, in general, it's bad. So what? Why should I care? And so as Mariam said yesterday, that's why we added this piece. I mean, it's one thing to say air pollution is bad, but then it's another thing to say it's bad because this is what it does to your body. This is what it does to your health. So it's just trying to tie them in to get them to care, to get them to actually do something. So like in this case, we could have maybe said something at the bottom here, like contact this NGO that works on air pollution to help volunteer, or just kind of redirecting them so that, okay, you got their attention, they care about it now, go get them to do something and help them with that. So this one, I cut out the title, but it's basically just about abuse, female abuse, whether 1 out of 11 women have been abused, and it's just different kinds of stats. And in general, this one is very popular, but we missed one very important thing. We didn't think about, this will be shared around, and somebody somewhere is going to see this. And they're gonna be like, it's not just me. Other people are having this problem too. And if we were at the bottom, we just had like, here's a toll-free line to talk for somebody for help, or here's the number for a shelter or something, just because somebody somewhere is going to see it and it's going to resonate with them. Or maybe a friend of theirs is going to see it and they could be like, hey, I saw this, I know you're going through this, here's some info. So it's like we got their attention, they're reading it, and some people are actually going to relate to it, but we didn't engage them. We didn't tell them how they can actually get help. I mean, yes, it might have only been a couple people, but if we helped those couple people, I think it would have been well worth just having the extra little space in the visual. Length. Are you going to read these infographics? Okay, these things are long. Like this one right here, we'll see it later, but this one, when printed, it's about this tall. Okay, that's how much content there is. So you gotta be careful. It's also like when you're writing a story. You have to contain it, keep it short. Visuals go through the same problem, okay? You know, this is social media. We have, yes?
Doesn't it matter for what you're doing it? For example, if you're doing some poster or something, a banner or something.
Correct.
Because it can be very simple and very good and very good story.
Yes.
And you don't use it and you want it on the wall or somewhere else. Then maybe it's good to use it.
Sure. Yes, for all of this, it all depends on your target audience and how you're going to do it. But for most people, they're going to be doing it online, and they're going to be using social media to do it. So like in this case, this is bad. But for posters, it's definitely possible. Like in some case, we would actually have to cut this, because nobody's going to read and like go all the way down to their knees to read the whole story. But if you like cut it into pieces, then that can work too. So everything is all about knowing your audience and how you're going to use it. Okay, short attention spans thanks to social media, so just keep it short and to the point. But it's hard because you want to tell your full story, but you don't want to bore them or have them pass it on. So it's a balancing act of how much you actually really need to put in there to tell your story versus how much you really want to put in there. Limit the number of talking points. Like as you saw before, you know, if you have all these different things going on, it could be overwhelming. Just keep to the bare minimum that you need. And then if you still have some space, or if it's okay, then maybe you can add some more. And then, kind of like what I just mentioned, if you do have this one big visual, actually consider splitting it. Like you can actually turn it into maybe a campaign where like you can say, okay, in this day we're going to publish this part, and this day we're going to publish this part, just to keep people's interest, keep them going. So there's different ways to deal with it. This visual, I found this online, and I just kind of took it because it is so dang long. So if you're looking at it, there's 3 visual items across. There's probably about 15 rows. So you're looking at 45 different items that you have to read. And yes, it's about Steve Jobs. There are many fanboys out there of Steve Jobs, so yes, you'll probably get them to read it. But the average person, like, I don't think I ever got past the first line just because I saw how much more there's to go. I'm like, no, I'm done. I don't care. I don't care to know what he's been through. This is just too much for me. Okay, and again, that's just me. But you kind of have to know your audience, who you're shooting for. If you're going for the Apple fanboys, then this will probably be just fine. But if you have a different audience, to me, this is way too much. Okay. So this is a story that we did. It's basically 7 different data points about religion in Georgia. And as you can see, I mean, it's nice big numbers. You can kind of see the percents. You see pretty charts, but it's still long. And so this one, what we probably should have done is actually just take it as individual facts, because we don't actually have a narrative going throughout this. It's just a bunch of facts. So we could have actually just split this out, and this could have been one, this could have been one, and we could have split it into a campaign of like a week long of here's what Georgia knows or what Georgia thinks about religion, and just every day just posting something new. Then maybe at the end of the event, we could then have a full one so that if somebody wanted, they can see it all at once or all together. But think about like sharing this on Facebook. You know, what would the share image be? Like you can't obviously do this. That's too much. So you'd actually just have to focus it on one data point. And then when they click on it, they could see the whole thing. Or you can actually just chop it up so they can see the individual pieces and just split it out over time. So this is an example of a fact, okay? So if you think back to the air pollution, I didn't point it out, but at the bottom of the visual, it had this fact that 19% of all deaths in Georgia are from environmental pollution. So what we could have done is taken this fact and used this as like the share image for the big infographic. So we could have used this as the way to get people's attention. Then when they click on it, they can go then and see the full story. So there's also the possibility, you always have this long data, but you can always cut it down and just take single data points that are interesting by themselves. So this is the longest infographic that we've created. Like I said, it's just over 2 meters tall when you print it out. And this one's about contraception. It's just basically all the different types of contraception, condoms, everything, what's good about it, what's bad about it, about how expensive it is. And so you can see we probably have about 20 different items here. And this is a lot, but this is actually our most viewed visual. It's like one of these weird cases that if you have the right content that maybe people can't get anywhere else in one simple to read format, they'll be willing to look through it. But I don't think that's the general case. I think it's like special cases, length is okay. But of course, you have to know your audience or just get lucky. And it still amazes me. But like this one's in English. So even though we did it mainly for the Georgian audience, we have a Georgian version too. This English version is the most popular just because everybody around the world searches for it and they find it. Colors. I'll just warn you. Okay, I won't show this next one for too long. Unfortunately, the display is bad, but this red is actually a very, very bright red. So if you look at it like here, okay, that's very bright. You know, nobody's going to sit there and strain their eyes and try and get through this. So basically, do not overwhelm the eyes. Okay. I mean, you can see it from a distance. This was so bright. You know, if it's like on your phone or in front of your face, you're going to see it and be like, nope, next, moving on. You know, it's not something you're going to click on in Facebook. So you want to use complementary colors and then pick colors that actually fit the mood of your story. Okay, if it's a happy story, choose happy colors. If it's a sad story, use like gray colors or something sad just to help kind of get that person to feel that emotion as part of your story. So for example, sex-selective abortion is kind of a hot topic, or not hot topic, it's a popular topic in Georgia. Because during Russian times, female birth control was seen as a bad thing, so it had like bad side effects on the drugs. And so women just stopped using birth control. And so abortions became the form of birth control. And then in the early 2000s, Georgia actually got ultrasounds for the first time. And that's actually when prenatal sex selection spiked. Because for the first time, they can actually see, am I having a boy or am I having a girl? And Georgians prefer to have boys. And so in the early 2000s, there was a huge spike. But going back to the colors. So this story is about girls, okay? And so we used pretty pink colors to kind of just get you to feel that girl emotion, that girl vibe. So in this story, we talked about the LGBT community and different aspects. And so we incorporated the rainbow colors into the charts just to kind of drive home that feeling. And again, like we're not using bright rainbow colors, we're using nice colors that don't strain the eye, but it's still easy to see everything. And just tie it all together. Then this visual, this is also about sex-selective abortion. It's a bigger story. And if you see here, we use a lot of gray, okay, because it's not a happy story. It's kind of a somber story. And so we're using this gray color just to kind of make the viewer just not feel happy. I want to say sad, but they're just not, a little depressed, a little sad, but they're not happy about sex-selective abortion, okay? So it's a subtle thing of using all this gray color, but it really helps like set the mood in the person's mind without them even knowing it. This is just kind of drab color, but in this case, it also helps these numbers pop out, okay? Numbers, okay? I know, especially for the non-math people, numbers can be a scary thing, but there are a couple easy things you can do that you don't have to worry about it. Okay, so this is actually on the Georgian news last month during the elections. I don't really know what they're trying to say, but if you see in 2011, okay, 2012, okay, that kind of goes. 13, wait, this number is bigger than this number, but this bar, why is this? Then you get down to here, this is 194. This is smaller than all these numbers, but it has one of the biggest bars. What the heck? So, I mean, this is a simple math thing, and my guess is that there's probably like the graphics person probably copy-pasted from an existing story and either forgot to change the numbers or forgot to change the bars. That's just my guess. I'm hoping that's what the problem was. But again, this is on the nightly news. So this is, you know, it's something easy. You know, if you would have done it in Excel or something like that, it does it for you, and you can just copy-paste it in. But mistakes happen. So with numbers, again, like we said at the very beginning with KISS, do not use too many numbers, okay? Numbers can overwhelm people. People get scared by numbers. So just keep it simple. Don't overwhelm people. I'm going to give examples of all these in a second, so if you don't understand it, you'll see it soon. If you're using a chart and you have a scale on the bottom, make sure the scale is actually linear and it's not some random intervals going on. If you have a visual next to the number, in the person's mind, those two things are connected. And so somehow that visual should convey the size of that number. Like if you think about the first story with all the people on top and then a number below, they had absolutely nothing to do with each other. And so it kind of confuses you at first. You're like, oh, this has something. Oh, wait. This has nothing to do with it. It's just there for the heck of it. Then the last thing is put large numbers into context. Like if you think about it when you hear it on the news, like 100,000 refugees had this, or so many people died in this, 5 million people this, 10 billion lari lost here, or something like that. These big numbers, people hear, but they can't relate to it because it's so big. But if you change it a bit and say something else, then people understand and they're more likely to say, oh crap, that's a huge thing. I'll give an example of that. So this one actually could have gone under length, it could have gone under color, but I chose to stuck it here under numbers because there are just way too many numbers here. And because of that, whatever charting program they used, they only had a small number of colors, and so they start repeating colors. So what exactly is this red? Like there's, reds down here. How do I know which one this is? So this is where it goes to like keeping it simple. Don't do too many. Like ideally in this case, you could have maybe done like the top 4 or 5, and then maybe you just had like an other category or something like that. But this is just way too many things. Okay. So in this case, it's nicely well laid out. All the things line up. But when you look at the scale, I'll read it to you because I don't think you can read it. So it's 8%, 11%, 14%, okay, we're good so far, 18%, 19%, 30%, okay? So this is what I mean by keeping the scale linear. Because, okay, if from here to here is 19 to 30%, what is this one in the middle? Is this 25%? Is it 20%? I have no idea because there's no consistency. So even though this is well structured, well laid out, because of this, you can't actually properly interpret this chart. So this one is similar. There's percents here, and each percent is supposed to be represented by a visual item. The problem here is that these visual items don't have the same width. So like in this case, this is a truck. This truck is supposed to represent the same amount as this phone, but they have different widths. And so you can't just easily go down and compare them, like say in this last one, where you can just easily see them all lined up. So in this one, you can't do this at all. You just have, basically you have to ignore this and just look at the numbers. So the visuals are nice, but because they're not all the same widths, you can't actually just easily compare the visual items to each other. So this one, Mariam showed yesterday during the talk. It's about Stalin. Just a side note for those that don't know, Stalin is from Georgia. And so Georgians he's a polarizing figure. Many Georgians still love him. And of course, many Georgians do not. But like I know, like out in the villages and stuff, there's still many Georgians that have a picture of Stalin on their wall. And so we found the survey result that basically said 45% of Georgians still think of Stalin as a positive figure. And we were like, holy crap. And so we did a story on it, and we did it about, it's estimated that somewhere between 20 million and 60 million people that he killed. There's no exact figures, but somewhere between 20 and 60 million. And so we took these different numbers, and this is where we kind of put it into context. So as an example, 1 million people were in prison or exiled. And that's actually equivalent to 18 times, like 18 stadiums full of people of the local stadium here in Georgia. So if you filled up 18 stadiums, that would be 1 million people. So this number 18, that's easy to understand. You're like, wow, 18, that's a lot of people there. And that's easier to understand than 1 million people. Or as another example, 9 million peasants were forced off of their lands. Okay, again, 9 million, huge number. But we could just say 2.5 times the population of Georgia was forced to flee their lands. So that's easier to represent and say, okay, there's a lot of people in Georgia. Can you imagine all of them 2.5 times just leaving and going somewhere else? So it's easier to kind of relate to that as opposed to just saying 9 million people. Okay, think about like the news, like I said before, when you get told these big numbers, you just kind of tune out because the number is just so damn big to deal with that you can't comprehend it. So on a related note, this also, like if you're if your goal is to like say get donations or to get people to engage something, and you have a bunch of numbers, like say, as an example, there's 2 million refugees that need your help, give us some money. In people's minds, they're like, wow, 2 million people, I can't help 2 million people, that's too many people. I mean, if I can give $10, that's gonna do nothing. And so people are most likely to tune out because they're using the logical part of their mind and not the emotional part that actually makes them become a part of it. So if you're trying to get them engaged, you actually want to stay away from numbers. You want to stick with the emotions, get them to feel the emotion and get it connected. So instead of saying like 2 million people need your help, they could say, here's Susie. Susie is a refugee from so-and-so. This is what her life is like. Please give $10 to help Susie. And in that case, you're like, oh, Susie needs help. Here's some money. And it's much easier for people to feel a part of that they can actually help. So depending on what you're trying to do with your story, numbers can be powerful or they can actually hurt your efforts. So you have to make sure you're using it properly. So now I just want to go through some other considerations to think of when you're going through and either the process of creating the story or going to publish it. The first one is about your website, your CMS system. Let's say you have a long infographic. Does your CMS system support showing a long picture that people can actually read, or does it automatically scale it down to something small? If it does it allow you to have a pop-up so you can then see a nice big image? Like when we first started doing our work, we built our CMS so that it can have a pop-up so you can see the full story. But then when we started doing infographics to other people, we just had this assumption that everybody else had this too, but we were wrong. And so we gave them an infographic, they went to do it, and they're like, oh, our system doesn't actually allow us to do this. Can you help? CMS stands for Content Management System. So it's like whatever the web system you use, like if you have a blog or your news site or something, just whatever your web system is to publish content. Okay. SEO, which stands for Search Engine Optimization. So if you're doing a lot of visuals, most likely it's going to be in some kind of a graphic form in an image. And search engines can't search within an image. So you have to, like say, if you had a graphic about, like the Stalin graphic, if somebody searched for Stalin, that graphic might never come up because it's just an image and Google doesn't know anything about it. So you have to be able to provide context to it. And in terms of HTML, I didn't write it here, but there's like typically, like if you think of your CMS system, for those that have it, when you go to post an image, there's usually a text box that says description. Use that, because you can put like whatever content you have inside your visual, put it inside that description box so that if somebody searches, that'll trigger Google and say, oh, there's an image about this, let's show it.
So
Okay.
you mean in image itself, yeah? When we like right click and it appears details?
Yes.
Description.
Yep. Yeah.
Or it's just keywords probably.
It depends on the system, but it's usually like description. The official HTML term is alt, as in like alternative text. But there's usually something when you load an image to give input some kind of text. And it doesn't have to be all the text from your infographic or your visual, but put something in there that you think people might search on so that it'll show up in part of the search results. Make it shareable. So again, if you think back to like your long infographics, when you're scrolling through in your social media feeds, if you see like this long infographic, if that's all it is, that it gets shared, it'd be like this really squished image that you can't read anything. So cut it, or make like a separate little fact about it that gets people's attention, that then when they click on it, they can go see the big version. But just sharing it, this big thing by itself, it's not a good idea because people won't be able to read it. Then for those of you that make interactives, I'm sure many of you have been like on different news agencies or different organizations. They have some cool interactive, you can filter by gender or age and country, do all this different stuff. And you're like, oh wow, look what I just found, I want to share it. But for many news sites, if you share it, it just takes them back to the beginning and they have to start all over again. So if you think about it, if it was like that for you and you shared it, you'd have to say, okay, go here, set this for gender, set this for country, set this for whatever, and then, wow, isn't that amazing? Nobody's going to do that. But the simple thing to do is, for any kind of filtering that you have, make sure the URL gets updated with those settings. so that when the page reloads, it reads those settings, sets it back to exactly where that person was, and they can see immediately what you saw. Okay, did that make sense? Okay. Plan. This is like the most important thing. If you're doing like this long project, you know, you're doing this research, surveys, you're getting all this donor money, think about at the beginning, like your communication plan. At the end of it, okay, you're gonna produce this 30-page report that most likely nobody will read, but as part of it, you're gonna create some kind of a visual that people will read, okay? Think of it ahead of time. If you think, oh, let me give an example. We've had quite a few organizations come to us at the end of their research saying, we want to tell this story. We're like, okay, give us your data. They gave us the data. The data does not tell that story because whatever they wanted to tell, they didn't actually research it or do a survey question that actually addressed that issue. So even though they wanted to tell the story, they didn't have the data to tell the story. So think about, like at the beginning of your project, okay, ideally at the end, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to say. And then work your way backwards so that you actually have those data points or those items to tell that message. Okay, don't wait until the end, because by then it's too late. Okay, just plan ahead. This one's important. Like say, if you're doing a visual, let's say you do a scratch, like you do a concept, you write it up on paper, take a step back and look at it. Like if it's something long or if there's a lot of stuff on it, think, would you actually read this? Would you actually share this? And it's hard because, you know, it's your story, it's your subject, so you want to say yes, but you have to be honest. You know, okay, if you saw this on Facebook, would you actually read this thing? Would you look at it? Or is it so long or so complicated, you're like, nope, moving on. So it's an important question. It's a hard one because you're biased, you want to say yes. And I've been doing this for 5 years and I still have this problem. It's like, of course they want to read it. And then I take a breath, I'm like, crap, I have to redo it. It's not going to work. Okay, so it's important to do it at the early stages, like when you're creating your concept, the idea. Maybe show it to somebody else. You're like, okay, for me, this is awesome. What do you think? Does this work for you? Does this tell the story? So just think about it before you get too far. So that was kind of the quick run through. We're going to go through some other examples now. But before we do that, are there any questions?
You went to, one example got pulled up, you went to 4 significant figures on one of your numbers. It was 99.21, you know, my experience playing with data is not 100% accurate. So even if you're going to 2 significant figures as suggested, you know, at what point are you happy that, yeah, we can confidently state 99% of X equals Y?
Yeah.
What is, you know, the rule of thumb? Is it a technical thing? Is it judgment?
I think it's actually knowing your audience. So if you're doing to like the general public, make it simple. They just need the general idea. But if you're doing it to like a specific, like say your research is about whatever, gender, and you're doing it just for people that work in this gender issue, then maybe having a decimal or 2 in there will be important to them because this is their life. This is what they work on. Or if it's like some kind of like a technical data conference or something, then by all means it's probably okay. But if it's just like a general public or maybe government people, keep it simple.
And in terms of the accuracy of the data you collect, let's say surveys, you
Sure.
think, oh, they might be a bit self-selecting, you know, you're not going to put,
Yeah.
you're not going to do a box chart, you know, for the general public. What do you do there? Do you just sort of round about 50%? Because it might be 45 and it might be 55. But it's
Yeah.
certainly not 80.
So we actually had a debate on this on the drive home last night.
Right.
Because one of the people I was driving with works for a local research company that does a ton of surveys. And they do great surveys, but they have a hard time getting people to understand that, okay, this is the number, but there is some possible error. It could be this or it could be to this. But the general population just doesn't understand that. And so like we were saying, okay, maybe you can do a range. Like it could be, okay, the odds of this person winning are between 45 and 50%. So you kind of give them like the outside, and they know somewhere in there is the number. But again, I think it depends on your audience and what you're trying to say.
It relates actually to, sorry, I've got a second question, but it relates to it because, when I've dealt with clients, it sounds like you've got this iceberg. At the top of it's the infographic, and then there's this vast amount of work that went into, asking a question, doing surveys or finding data, refining it, designing it. And you talked about the 30-page report nobody will read, but that looks more impressive in terms of volume or outputs for your money as a donor or a commercial client. How do you persuade them that less is more, or do you give them both?
So I think, like say in this case, if you have a report to go with it, then that report can have all the details. It can have these extra numbers.
Yeah, like
and
your error margins.
like, yeah.
So you can say at the bottom of your graphic, for more information, go to
Yes.
URL.
Yeah.
And you've covered yourself if your 50%
Or
was actually 55.
Yeah, or you can maybe in the visual itself, you can maybe have like a little footnote symbol. And at the bottom of your visual, you can say what the range is. So but like keep it like to a minimum so it's not distracting.
Yeah.
But so it could still be in there to cover your butt, make sure, hey, it was there. But just keep it small and like keep it out of the way.
Okay.
So as an example, like similar, right now we're working with UNFPA. They basically funded the census here from 3 years ago. And they just wrote 5 reports, it's actually being released today, on like gender, youth, aging, something else. But each of these reports are 70-page reports, detailed reports that, I mean, I had to read it for my work, but if I didn't have to, I would never read this stuff. But these reports have so much detailed information, it's great. So they came to us and said, help us. We want people to actually know about this. And so we created like 10 small facts about this that are interesting facts. And in there, we got rid of the decimals. We just said like 10%, 20%. We just kept it simple because that's for the general public. But then the government or whomever, people that care about it, they can also look at the report and see the actual full numbers. So.
In the last illustration about Stalin, I just imagine to write it more simple and write just like this icon of arena.
Yeah.
For example.
Sure.
18 times, and so is it
That can work too.
okay
But
or not? I want to know.
yeah, I mean, you could definitely. So what she's saying,
Simple or it's good, bad, ugly, or something else.
I think as long as you have a bit of text above it, kind of putting everything into context, then that works. Because if somebody so basically what her idea is like instead of having this sentence, just having this figure times 18.
Yeah.
It's short, it's simple, it could work. It's just kind of a judgment call. I think you have to see what else you have going on. Like if you have text above it, to maybe just set the stage of, okay, this times 18, that's what this means. It definitely could work, and that would be much easier. Yeah.
So you mentioned that like sometimes people come to you and want to do something and they don't have the data.
Yeah.
So what they do in the end, and like for example, what would you suggest to do when you have some information like research, for example, that is prevailing with the quality of data, not the quantity, not the numbers, but like that it's made like I don't know, based on some sort of interviews or something like this, and you have
Sure.
kind of qualitative data. So would you like even go for the like visualizations in this case?
Okay, so there are two questions there. I'll do the last one first. So basically he's asking, if you don't have numbers, can you still do a visual, right? So you just basically just have text. And I think in many cases, yes, you can, because even if it's like you said, like from an interview, you can still graphically kind of represent, come up with something, some kind of symbols or something, just to, even if you have like the text from the interview, you can still have like a couple graphics that kind of give a summary of what that was. So that visual item or items help, so they don't actually fully have to read this whole text, but looking at this, they have the general idea of what was said. So like if you think back, if you're at the talks yesterday with the David Bowie illustrations, some of those are abstract, but some of those also helped kind of tell the story. So you can definitely do, you don't have to have data, you can just have a visual based off of text, as long as the visuals help tell part of the story. Like if you think back to the beginning with like all the people, like with the one with the street, there's so many other visuals in there that it gets distracting and it doesn't tell the story. But if you can come up with visuals that represent the story, then it definitely helps. Like in the one example I showed about the visa-free travel, where there's the 7 text items. Like if we could have just somehow come up with a visual or two for each of the text items, that would have been much better. So it's definitely possible, yeah. So then the second question was, what do we do when people come to us and they don't actually have the data or the whatever story they want to tell, we can't actually tell it. We have to work with them. Like sometimes we say it's not here and it just ends there and they're disappointed. Other times we're like, okay, what happens if we adjust it a little bit to say this instead, or we just maybe tone down the emphasis. We can still try and tell that story, but we just can't tell it as strong. So we definitely try and work with them, but actually I don't know if we've ever just said no. I think the no would be more for if we just don't have the time for it. But we usually try and work with them. I guess while we're saying this, as a side note, if you're not a graphic person, like a designer, an illustrator, and you go to somebody else to do it for you, you can't just hire any graphic person to do it. This also actually goes for websites. You want to hire somebody that can actually help you tell your story. Like they have an idea of the process of telling a story. Because many graphics people, you just say, okay, create a cow for me, and they create a cow. But if you say, okay, I have this story, can you give me something that helps tell it? That's very different. And so you have to ask the right questions when you're asking these other people to help you, to make sure that they actually can help you. We've had many cases of like hearing stories from other people that, okay, they couldn't come to us because of the time, so they went to somebody else. But this other person, they just said, okay, draw a cow, so I drew a cow. But it never actually fit with the story. It should have been a dog instead or something like that. So the designer didn't actually ever think about it. They just did whatever the person told them. The same thing actually goes for creating like an interactive or a website, is you want somebody to actually give you feedback. Even if you have your own idea, you think it's perfect, get somebody that'll actually help improve your idea and not just do what you say, okay? You might not like it, because you probably might not like it. Somebody says, nah, I don't think that's a good idea. But it helps make your story or whatever your product, whatever it is, it makes it stronger. Okay?
What are the most common mistakes journalists do generally while co-working with graphic partners? That's a light question, but
Okay, so the question was, what are some common mistakes that journalists make when working with designers? I'll think of some. I'll try and think of some. But in general, what we do is we actually have a questionnaire so that when we meet a new client, or it's a new project with a former client, we go through this questionnaire and we ask them all these questions to make sure they actually know what the heck it is that they want us to do. Because many times they have this vague idea, but they haven't actually thought of all the details. And so we're trying to help them through that process. Like, what is it at the end of all this? What is it you want to actually do? What is the end result? Why are you doing this? Who is your target audience? We just try and ask all these questions. And even like if we get into branding, like creating a logo or something, we have a whole nother set of questions, like what kind of emotions are you trying to convey and all this other stuff. So I guess one issue is just in general, they have a vague idea, but they never actually sat down to write it out. And so in general, we've actually had quite a few clients where we had to go through many iterations, many different designs before we finally understand what the heck it is that they want. It's painful, it's frustrating. Like one of the first websites we did as a design, it took 3 different designs before they're finally like, okay, actually this is what we want, yeah. And we wanted to kill them after the second one. So we just learned that we have to ask them a lot of questions. So I think that's the biggest issue, yeah.
For example, now it's a lot of information you cannot understand which one is fake, which one is real data. And how is it important to show the source of the data that you use? Because you show the examples, but they cannot find any source that you use.
Yeah, so yes, I have all the bottoms cut off. Like this is just a snippet. But yes, so in our visuals that we do, at the bottom, we always show the source. And on our website, where we posted all our visuals, and the sidebar where we have like a description and everything, we also include a link to the data source. So like if we actually, like say, got data from the government to tell the story, we put that spreadsheet online and we add a link to it so that you can actually go look at it yourselves. So yeah, in general, it's great practice to put your source there because it also gives, like you said, it gives that person confidence that's reading it to think, okay, this is something real, it's not made up. Yeah. Okay. So shall we go through some examples? Okay. And again, I just kind of picked these. They may not be bad, they may be bad, or they may be good or bad. It's kind of your judgment call, but I just kind of want to show them and just kind of get you guys talking about it and seeing, just to kind of start thinking about it. So this is just a simple fact. So the text says the Georgian lari has reached its lowest point ever against the US dollar. So we just have this timeline and just showing like the value of 1 lari in USD and just showing it over time and that it's at its lowest value, okay? So what do you guys think about this? Is it,
No, I don't like it.
you don't like it?
Yeah, because it's lowest value is like for the last year or for the last 10 years. And we don't know from maybe for the February it will be lower, so
Okay,
it depends when it is published, because if you publish this in 2017, it's not
sure.
coming.
Okay, so adding some context. This is actually daily, so this is every day, and we're just showing like the main years here. And this was published probably like the day after that this happened. So like where we published it, you know, there's obviously like a date of when it's published and all that. So there is some other context. Yeah, so there are years down here, but all these data points are actually every day since 2008 to this is 2016. Sometime in 2016 is probably November when everything crashed. So I saw a couple other hands. Yes, sir.
It takes 2 to tango. Exchange rate is about 2 currencies against each other.
Yeah.
Any fluctuations there could be due to the dollar moving, not the lari. If you're trying
Correct.
to tell a story about the Georgian economy, you can't tell it with a single exchange rate. You need, you know, euro, sterling, yen. You need price of gold, you need something else to give it some context. The dollar by itself
Yeah,
doesn't tell you the story.
And it will start there.
yeah. So again, going back to earlier, this is just a fact. It's not a story. So like all these other things would help tell the full story of like, okay, is this just the lari versus the dollar, or is it actually more widespread? So that's a good point. Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
So it shows that everything in time, so within time, it is always graduated from the time to show how it changes. So you can very simply, not in proportion I, you can see from 2008 until 2014, and there, right is here, this goes to an average, very simple.
Yeah. Yeah, so just as a fact by itself, it can be positive, it can be good. It's hard to read the numbers here, but it's going by 0.1, so this is 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, 5, 6, 7, 8. To me, the problem with this is like when you're walking around Tbilisi and you have all exchange rates on the boards, this is converting it from 1 lari to $1. So it's actually the opposite of what the boards say, because the boards always say how many lari per dollar. So nobody thinks, oh, $0.6 is 1 lari. That's not the way people think. They actually think the other way. So we could have had the same chart, but have the different number here that people are more familiar with. They're used to seeing, like right now, it's 2.6 something. So that's the numbers that they see every day, so that might actually help them see it better.
Too many numbers. There are too many numbers.
I mean, here?
It's contrast maybe.
Yeah. So our designers sometimes don't like to do full contrast. They like to kind of blend it together. And so on a monitor like this, it's definitely hard to read.
But what was the goal of this? Why?
Just to show, this probably was in November when like the lari started to plunge, and we just wanted to show, hey, today we hit a new record, the lowest ever, yay. So that was really it. But again, we're not an actual journalism organization, so ideally it would have been part of maybe a bigger story, just talking about like, yeah, this is just pure fact.
It's kind of like a small thing, but the last year, 2016 in red, it kind of also tells the story like, wow, we're at this low point. And it looks more serious in a way.
Yeah.
2016 in red.
Yeah, so because we're at the low thing and it's a bad thing, that's probably why the designers kind of changed this one color just to make it stand out. Somebody had, yeah.
Just to understand, so you didn't provide any context to that.
No, there might have been a short description like on the side, but for these kind of things, we try and keep it as just a general fact that by themselves say something. It might not be part of a full story, but this is still something that, like, say on social media, people will probably share this, because just the idea that we've hit our lowest point ever, that itself is kind of like a story. Then ideally, I guess somebody else would have to take it and actually expand on it.
There's no context in terms of what the effect is. So an
Yeah.
obvious one is the price of fuel if we drive cars.
Sure.
Because oil is priced in dollars, so there's
It's
a
gonna
very
go up.
direct correlation
Yeah,
between the exchange rate and what you'll pay next week for South Caucasus.
Yeah.
And that's not shown. The issue of turning it, I think, the numbers the other way around and how many lari to the dollar is that your
it would
graph
actually
is
go
then
up, yeah.
up. You don't have to reverse it.
I think that's why we did it this way, because if we do it the other way, then yeah, that number's going up, and we wouldn't be able to say the lowest point ever.
When you were going through, I was thinking The Economist is very good at its graphing, but its audience is slightly different to yours. So it can do that, have the graph point downwards in order to
Yeah.
show good and bad, high and low.
Yeah.
I guess you have to make some different judgments there.
So I think we could have maybe reworded it instead of saying the lowest point ever, we could have said the worst point ever. And then we could have shown it going this way, and that would have been just fine. But because you used this word lowest, we felt we needed it to go down.
I agree. If you
Yeah.
do it low, you can't have it high.
Yeah, yeah.
To continue with that, perhaps to relate more to the audience, it could have been reversed, not the lowest, but you pay the highest now
Yeah,
for the dollar.
yeah,
And then that way you relate more to the audience.
yep,
Because
yeah,
you pay more for the dollar.
yeah. So, as you
So
see,
our economy is to relate, so it's my economy is growing.
yeah. So as you see, this is just a simple data point. And we all have these different ideas of what's good, what's bad, what works. So there's no like absolute, this is the best way to do it. It all depends on like your viewpoint, like at that time. That, yeah, we could have just changed this word and then the chart would have gone up and people would maybe relate to it better. So it's, you know, just a single data point can be, there's different ways you can do it.
Yeah, if you're a
Okay.
Georgian company exporting to the US, that's not grey and bad, that's champagne colour.
Yes.
And can you show original colors? Because it's good. For me, it's a question because I cannot see it.
It's still
So-
quite close, isn't it?
Yeah, this one's pretty close, like with the white here and stuff. It doesn't stand out that much, yeah. Okay, let's move on. So this is another fact, and let me just explain this one first. So we basically have the two dominating parties, and this is back in,
5 years.
no, I'll explain it. I think this is probably 2014, okay? And so one of the projects we have is we work with the Georgian government to record all the laws that have been passed. And so they have their own voting system, but it's some crappy system. So then we have to clean it and work with it to then put it online. And so we took this voting data because we realized the ruling party is Georgian Dream. So what this is saying is this is a percent. So the percent of times that they voted on a law, okay? So UNM, the party that was like this, I guess, opposition party, like 10 to 20%, that's how often they were voting. Whereas Georgian Dream was up here like 60 to 100%, okay? So the idea was just to show that, okay, UNM for the most part is down here. There are a couple people that vote quite often, but UNM is down here, while Georgian Dream votes the most, okay? And so, and let me say one more thing. So all these individual things are each individual person. We try to figure out a way to be able to show each person. We could have just done an average and say, okay, Georgian Dream's average is this, UNM's average is this, Georgian Dream is here, and just had two data points and been done. But what we actually did is we took, we just kind of randomized. We just kind of created some fake lines on the chart here and just kind of randomly put them into the chart. So even though this kind of looks like a heart, we didn't mean it to be that. But basically we just kind of split the people out so that you can actually see them. But this axis really doesn't mean anything. It's just, here's UNM, here's Georgian Dream. And we just kind of split them out so you can kind of see all the people. So that's all I have to say. So now, criticize all you want. So I think you had something.
Well, I was interested in what was the rules.
Yeah.
I think they use as the expression that there are the same number of people in both political parties, but for me,
Correct.
I'm not sure if
Correct,
it's
sure.
true.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So probably in this one to make it, because this is complicated to see, but for some reason we were stubborn and we felt we had to do it this way. But I think probably the easiest, the best way would have just average all this and say on average, UNM votes this much percent while Georgian Dream votes this much percent. That would have been much simpler, easy, like people would just automatically understand it and be able to move on. But here it's just more complicated than it needed to be.
I wish I could bring that in my mind because here there are many dots that can be like just one dot can be 10 people, right? And you have an impression that to me these dots look the same as if like number of parliamentarians from one party is the same as number of parliamentarians in another one, which is not the case.
Actually, here it is. but like here, it's hard to see, but there's many of them stacked on top of each other.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
That's why you can't really see individual people here. And information is still lost. You have like wrong impression from this, whereas averages would have shown the difference better.
Yeah, yeah.
The spread's quite interesting. If this was interactive, I'd be going right up to the top left
To
corner.
see who that is.
See
Yeah.
who that is. Who's
Yeah.
studying in opposition is earning his or her money.
Yeah.
And again, looking at that outlier on the other side,
Yeah,
because of course your local, I don't know quite how the system works here, but
Yeah.
your local member of parliament, you'll know if they're actually doing their job.
yeah. So again, this goes back to planning, of saying, okay, we want to tell a story. You know, do people actually care about each individual person? And yes, this could have been like a simple interactive where you could actually hover over each person to see who it is. Because we've always had this idea of saying, you know, how much is your parliament member making per vote? So like this person down here, well, not this person, like say one of these people here, they're basically making like 5 votes. So they're getting paid thousands of lari a year just to make 5 votes. Whereas like these people up here, you know, it's a different, but we can never actually properly figure out how to tell that. But that's where planning goes in, like, okay, what message do we want to say? What's the best way to do it? Like, can we just do a static or should it be interactive?
It's quite staggering anyway.
Yeah, yeah.
Believing of, I assume your numbers are correct, but
So what the reason is you and like whoever the opposition is, there's no point in voting because it's just going to pass anyways. So they just don't vote.
also everybody votes on mass in the block, do they?
Yeah. So these are like for laws that are being passed. Like when it gets to the end, they're like, what's the point? It's going to pass. I don't need to vote. So, yeah. But there are some people that just never show up and never vote. You know, that's like these people down here. So,
I think it would show a better picture if the Georgian dream would be wider and the Ukrainian would be smaller.
sure. So we're almost out of time, so I just kind of want to go through a couple more. So this is part of an infographic. There's more to it, but this is a story we did about basically, how do I say this? Somehow I determined what percent of the internet is in what language, like the websites, like what percent are in English, what percent are in German, Chinese, and Georgian. And so my idea was that, you know, what is this number? Like 50, 60% something of the internet is in English. And so my idea was that Georgians really should learn a foreign language because in Georgian, I can't read that. 0.05% of the internet is in Georgian. So if all you know is Georgian, you basically are losing a lot of the internet. And so that was the point of this. But because we did this as a circle, and you can't see it, but there's actually the world in the middle here, so that's why I like this, why it's like this. But because it's a circle, it's kind of hard to compare all of this. And so to me, what would have been better if we redid this is actually just to have bar charts. Because you would see like English is over here, and then it'd like jump down to this, and get smaller. And you'd just be able to say, like the next one after English is German at 6%. So English is 56%, and then the next highest one is German at 6%. So you would just see this huge scale going from here to here. And that's just between first and second. And it's easier to see that scale than it is seeing it as scale in a circle. Okay.
Common contrast is not so much visible.
Yeah, it kind of went just from dark and it fades to light. So again, on the screen, it's a little easier to read. But again, our designers sometimes like to not do high contrast. So I wanted to show this one. This is one we did about the Georgian budget and the priorities. And so I just have the top 4 priorities here. But I just kind of wanted to focus on two parts. One, this is a crap ton of load of data. There's just a lot of numbers, a lot of charts. Too much. We didn't keep it simple. This is just way too much. But on top of that, these circles, again with circles, it's hard to compare them. So this number is 6 million, this number is 10 million. But so can you tell that this circle is about half of this circle? It's hard to compare circles. So as a pie chart, circles are great. But when you go to compare circles to each other, it's very hard to compare them. So that's kind of my main thing here.
If you have data, data, how much time do you spend on this?
It depends.
For
Some
example,
This is one of our first ones that we did, and this one probably took us at least a few days because we were really fighting ourselves with how do we put all this data in there and make it stand out. And like this is red because this is 2012, so this is UNM and what their budget was. And then George and Dream came into power, so then this is the budget that they created. So that's why this is red and blue. But do we actually need to show all of these years? Is that really necessary? Then this here is showing whether from here to here, did the overall percent of the total budget for this item go up or did it go down? And then the second item is just how much money did it go up or go down by? Because it's possible that because the total budget changes every year, you can see here is 6 billion, here it's 10 billion. But the percent might actually go down, but it might actually be earning more money. So it's like this weird combination thing. It gets complicated, and I know it's just too much. Okay. I think I just have one more. Yeah. So this one, I was going back through all our visuals, and I looked at this one. I'm like, why? Why is this a visual? This is just all text, and this is only a third of it. There's 2 more sections below. That's, again, it's just all text. There's really no, I mean, there's pictures and stuff, but so what? This could have been like what I call a multimedia story. It could have been like nice big images with some text, images with some text, and it could have told the exact same thing as this. Like, why did we waste our time doing this when we could have just done like a pretty blog post about it? So again, it's kind of planning. Yes, with some text, you can add visuals and make it okay, but if it's a lot of text with very few visuals, then what's the point? Okay.
Sketch your infographics, or you just make them and see if it works?
I want them to sketch it, but they don't always do that. But typically, yes, we try and do it because we have a general idea, and sometimes we ourselves are bad. We're like, oh yeah, I have this idea, it'll be great, do it. But you haven't thought it all the way through yet. So by drawing it out first, it makes you work through some ideas of how it's going to flow, what all's going to be a part of it. And then we can look at it and be like, yeah, this isn't going to work, we have to do this instead. But sometimes we just dive into it, and then I prefer not to, but sometimes we just do. And sometimes it works, but many times it actually takes longer because you put in all this work to do this first draft, and then you realize it's not going to work. Whether it's like the design is bad, or the pieces in it, it's not a workable story, or we need to add something else, so it takes many drafts. So I try and keep to the pencil drafts first, but it just doesn't always work that way. Yeah.
If you go back to that budget thing, do you take inflation into account? Because usually it can show the increase just because of inflation.
So this, we just took directly whatever the government published. So if the government includes inflation, then yes. But we just took directly what the government numbers were that they published. Okay, so in general, visuals help. And it can be easy, it can be complicated. There's never any, this is the best way to do it. But there are just some guidelines to try and make it as good as you possibly can. Okay, people always have different opinions. I mean, at the beginning, we used to fight with each other. Like Nino, the person in charge of all this, and Irakli, our designer. And I thought there was some old married couple sometimes, so they're just going at it, just fighting. So it's not easy. We all have different opinions. But like for us, we actually found that the fighting actually helped us because we have different viewpoints. And eventually we kind of come around and say, okay, you think this, we think this, let's settle on this. So, so for us, it actually helps us. So don't be afraid to ask other people for their opinion and actually listen to them. Like if you don't like it, take a deep breath and then think about it and say, okay, do they actually have a valid point? They might not, but still take their opinion into account. Okay? Anything else? Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.